Good morning. Our program will start in 5 minutes. If you are standing, please find a seat, embrace that seat, and sit on the seat. Thank you for your punctuality. Our program begins in 4 minutes. Please take your seats and please turn off your mobile phones, any device that will make noise. Our program begins in 4 minutes. Global citizens, thank you for making an hour of your time to watch a special address on climate action. My name is Femi Oke. I am your guide through the program for the next 60 minutes. And in this role, I was thinking about what puts the special in special. So I dug a little deep to see about the root of the word. Greater than, better than, different from what is usual. That is a perfect explanation for where we are with climate action, with what is needed to create climate action today. You will hear in the next 60 minutes from our host, the American Museum of Natural History, from Mike Bloomberg, the UN Secretary General's Special Climate Envoy on climate ambition and solutions, and from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And now, we can start officially with the President of the American Museum of Natural History, Sean Decatur. Mr. President, thank you for having us.
Good morning. I'd like to offer a welcome to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, the Honorable Michael Bloomberg, the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions, and welcome to our distinguished guests and friends. We are in the midst of a climate crisis. That's just undeniable. The evidence is clear, but actually many of the solutions are clear as well. A much bigger difficulty is finding the will and courage to act in response to the alarm. We at the American Museum of Natural History are honored to be the site for this important address on climate action. So we share the Secretary General's sense of urgency about the need for action and to support efforts to mobilize and amplify change. In fact, the museum is a particularly important site to host this conversation. This is a scientific research institution that examines the natural history of the planet, ecosystems, species, habitats, and the threats to them, the ways in which human culture has shaped the planet, and how changes in the planet are impacting human culture. But more than that, the museum brings this science to the public through exhibitions, educational programs, and activities to expand not only scientific literacy, but the public's comfort with complexity. At a time when our planet is under threat every day, diverse audiences come together here on common ground in an institution dedicated to inquiry, discovery, and communication. And this institution has the ability, indeed the responsibility, not only to deepen public understanding of the climate crisis, not only to spur individuals to take action, but to inspire all of us to imagine life in a world that has found the will to address this existential threat. That can give us all hope for a shared future. Much of the museum's work in climate action and education has been inspired by Plan NYC, launched in this very room during Michael Bloomberg's tenure as New York's mayor. It placed New York City at the forefront of urban sustainability, environmental action, and climate change mitigation. So I'm pleased this morning to introduce Michael Bloomberg, who really for this group needs no introduction. He founded and led pioneering technology powerhouse Bloomberg LP, served 3 terms as New York City mayor, one of our time's most courageous and effective leaders on public health, education, gun violence, and climate change, and is a visionary philanthropist and change agent whose Bloomberg Philanthropies has given away $17.4 billion to support all types of work in these areas. And just last month, President Biden awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, for extraordinary contributions to the United States and the world. We're honored to have with us today such a powerful champion and catalyst for environmental and climate action on this stage. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions, the Honorable Michael Bloomberg.
Sean, thank you. If I could get my daughters to listen to that, maybe they'd think better of me. But, all kidding aside, and actually one of my daughters is on the board of this very museum. It's a wonderful thing. And thank you, Sean, for your leadership of the Museum of Natural History. This is one of the great treasures of not just New York City, not just America, but of the world. We are surrounded by so many strange creatures displayed here, some of whom in real life maneuver secretly in the dark, all of them engaged in a ruthless battle for survival. It is almost like being back in City Hall. Thank you all for coming, and let me give a very special welcome to our guest of honor, Secretary General Guterres. Over 7 years, he has been head of the UN. The world has had no more passionate or determined advocate for action on climate change. I used to live in his neighborhood. I got driven out. I didn't actually. I moved before you took office. I left. Sorry. I would still be there if I had known you were going to move in across the street. Seriously, there have been so many urgent issues the UN has had to confront during his tenure, but he has never allowed them to diminish the urgency of the climate crisis. When climate-related disasters strike, as they have increasingly lately, he has never allowed world leaders to turn their eyes away from or ignore reality. He has done a tremendous amount to keep us moving forward on many different fronts, including ones with ties to this very hall. Let me explain. 17 years ago, on Earth Day 2007, I stood underneath this same blue whale to announce the city's first ever comprehensive agenda to confront climate change. We called it Plan YC, a greener, greater New York. And for a long time, people viewed the fight against climate change as a trade-off with economic growth. They said you could fight climate change or grow the economy, but you couldn't do both. But we believed, as the Secretary General, or SecDef as we call him, General has shown that the opposite is really true. All the steps we took to fight back then, fight climate change, also made New York a better place to live, a better place to work, and a better place to visit. And that helped us attract new residents and businesses and new investment. And I'm glad to say that in just 6 years, we were able to cut the city's carbon emissions by 13%, while making the city's air cleaner than it had been in more than 50 years, while growing the economy and adding a record number of jobs. When we launched Plan NYC here in this room, climate change was largely viewed as a problem for national governments to solve. At the UN Annual Climate Conference in 2009, city leaders were stuck watching from the sidelines. But in the years that followed, while nations struggled to find consensus, cities proved that they had the will and the ability to help lead the change. At COP28 last December, cities and other subnational groups had an official role for the first time in the history of international climate talks. And that was a great step forward, and the Secretary General deserves a lot of credit for making it happen. He has long been a champion of bottom-up partnership that enlists every part of society, every level of government, and every sector of the economy. It was one of the reasons why last year's COP was the most ambitious and productive conference since Paris. Under the leadership of the Secretary General's COP28 was focused on tangible actions that can be taken right away and not on far-off goals. And as a result, we saw important and wide-ranging agreements across many of the areas that are contributing to the crisis, from coal to methane to heavy industry to deforestation. That spirit of urgency and partnership will be essential over the next year as countries update the commitments they made under the Paris Agreement. The Secretary General has been right, urging them to aim high, and as we saw in New York City, there is every reason to do so. In addition to all the important support he's provided to cities, he has been a powerful voice for the developing countries that have contributed the least to the crisis, but now face some of the worst effects. He has been a strong advocate for multinational lenders to use their capital to help developing countries attract more private investment, and he's been equally forceful in rallying more businesses and investors to join the fight against climate change and raise their own goals for cutting emissions. Ambition is important, but we all know that action is what really matters. We really don't have any time to waste and a lot of work to do. We owe Secretary General Guterres a big thanks for all his leadership, including the moral leadership, because fighting climate change is a moral imperative that we all share. We have a responsibility to billions of people at risk today and to all the generations to come to act boldly and quickly. If you look at television every day, you will see another forest fire, another drought, another flood, another storm. You'll see people losing everything they have and many dying. We've just got to do something about this. And with his help, we can. He has been a tireless reminder to world leaders of their responsibility and fearless in calling them out when they fall short. It's an enormous, historic role, but we couldn't ask from a more capable person to fill it. It has been my pleasure to work with him in my role as Secretary, as a Special Envoy, and to call him a friend, and it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to him right now. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Dear friends of the planet, Today is World Environment Day. It is also the day that the European Commission's Copernicus Climate Change Service officially reports May 2024 as the hottest May in recorded history. This marks 12 straight months of the hottest months ever. For the past year, every turn of the calendar has turned up the heat. Our planet is trying to tell us something, but we don't seem to be listening. Dear friends, the American Museum of Natural History is the ideal place to make the point. This great museum tells the amazing story of our natural world, of the vast forces that have shaped life on Earth over billions of years. And humanity is just one small blip on the radar. But like the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, we are having an outsized impact. In the case of climate, we are not the dinosaurs, we are the meteor. We are not only in danger, we are the danger, but we are also the solution. So, dear friends, we are at a moment of truth. The truth is, almost 10 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted, the target of limiting long-term global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is hanging by a thread. The truth is, the world is spewing emissions so fast that by 2030, a far higher temperature rise would be all but guaranteed. Brand new data from leading climate scientists released today show the remaining carbon budget to limit long-term warming to 1.5 degrees is now around 200 billion tons. That is the maximum amount of carbon dioxide that the Earth's atmosphere can take if we are to have a fighting chance of staying within the limit. And the truth is, we are burning through the budget at reckless speed, spewing out around 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. We can all do the math. At this rate, the entire carbon budget will be busted before 2030. The truth is, global emissions need to fall 9% every year until 2030 to keep the 1.5 degree limit alive. But they are heading in the wrong direction. Last year, they rose by 1%. The truth is, we already face incursions into 1.5 degree territory. The World Meteorological Organization reports today that there is an 8% chance the global annual average temperature will exceed the 1.5 degree limit in at least one of the next 5 years. In 2015, the chance of such a breach was near zero. And there is a 50-50 chance that the average temperature for the entire next 5-year period will be 1.5 degrees higher than pre-industrial times. We are playing Russian roulette with our planet. And we need an exit ramp off the highway to climate hell. And the truth is, we have control of the wheel. The 1.5 degree limit is still just about possible. And let's remember, it's a limit for the long term, measured over decades, not months or years. So stepping over the threshold, the 1.5, for a short time does not mean the long-term goal is shot. It means we need to fight harder now. The truth is, the battle for 1.5 degrees will be won or lost in the 2020s under the watch of leaders today. And all depends on the decisions those leaders take or fail to take, especially in the next 18 months. It's climate crunch time. The need for action is unprecedented, but so is the opportunity, not just to deliver on climate, but on economic prosperity and sustainable development. Climate action cannot be captive to geopolitical divisions. So, as the world meets in Bonn for climate talks and gears up for the G7 and G20 summits, the United Nations General Assembly and COP29, we need maximum ambition, maximum acceleration, maximum cooperation, in a word, maximum action. So, dear friends, why all this fuss about 1.5 degrees? Because our planet is a mess of complex connected systems, and every fraction of a degree of global heating counts. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees could be the difference between extinction and survival for some small island states and coastal communities. The difference between minimizing climate chaos or crossing dangerous tipping points. 1.5 degrees is not a target, it's not a goal, it's a physical limit. Scientists have alerted us that temperatures rising higher would likely mean the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet and West Antarctic ice sheet with catastrophic sea level rise, the destruction of tropical coral reef systems and livelihoods of 300 million people, the collapse of the Labrador Sea Current that would further disrupt weather patterns in Europe, and widespread permafrost melt that would release devastating levels of methane, one of the most potent heat-trapping gases. Even today, we are pushing planetary boundaries to the brink, shattering global temperature records and reaping the whirlwind. And it is a travesty of climate justice that those least responsible for the crisis are hardest hit. The poorest people, the most vulnerable countries, indigenous peoples, women and girls. The richest 1% emit as much as 2/3 of humanity. And extreme events turbocharged by climate chaos are piling up, destroying lives, pummeling economies, and hammering health, wrecking sustainable development, forcing people from their homes, and rocking the foundations of peace and security as people are displaced and vital resources depleted. Already this year, a brutal heat wave has baked Asia with record temperatures, shriveling crops, closing schools, and killing people. Cities from New Delhi to Bamako to Mexico City are scorching. Here in the US, savage storms have destroyed communities and lives. We have seen drought disasters declared across Southern Africa, and extreme rains flood the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and Brazil. And the mass global coral bleaching caused by unprecedented ocean temperatures soaring past the worst predictions of scientists. The cost of all this chaos is hitting people where it hurts. From supply chains severed to rising prices, mounting food insecurity, and uninsurable homes and businesses. And that bill will keep growing. Even if emissions hit zero tomorrow, a recent study found that climate chaos will still cost at least 38 trillion a year by 2050. Climate change is the mother of all stealth taxes paid by everyday people and vulnerable countries and communities. Meanwhile, the godfathers of climate chaos, the fossil fuel industry, rake in record profits and feast off trillions in taxpayer-funded subsidies. Dear friends, we have what we need to save ourselves. Our forests, our wetlands, and our oceans absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They are vital to keeping 1.5 alive or pulling us back if we do overshoot that limit. We must protect them, and we have the technologies we need to slash emissions. Renewables are booming as costs plummet and governments realize the benefits of cleaner air, good jobs, energy security, and increased access to power. Onshore wind and solar are the cheapest source of new electricity in most of the world and have been for years. Renewables already make up 30% of the world's electricity supply, and clean energy investments reached a record high last year, almost doubling in the last 10. Wind and solar are now growing faster than any electricity source in history. And economic logic makes the end of the fossil fuel age inevitable. The only questions are, will that end come in time, and will the transition be just? Dear friends, we must ensure the answer to both questions is yes. And we must secure the safest possible future for people and planet. That means taking urgent action, particularly over the next 18 months, to slash emissions, to protect people and nature from climate extremes, to boost climate finance, and to clamp down on the fossil fuel industry. Let me take each element in turn. First, huge cuts in emissions led by the huge emitters. The G20 countries produce 80% of global emissions. They have the responsibility and the capacity to be out in front. Advanced G20 economies should go furthest, fastest, and show climate solidarity by providing technological and financial support to emerging G20 economies and other developing countries. Next year, governments must submit so-called national determined contributions, in other words, national climate action plans. And these will determine emissions for the coming years. At COP28, countries agreed to align those plans with the 1.5-degree limit. But these national plans must include absolute emission reduction targets for 2030 and 2035. They must cover all sectors, all greenhouse gases, and the whole economy. And they must show how countries will contribute to the global transitions essential to 1.5 degrees, putting us on a path to global net zero by 2050, to phase out fossil fuels, and to hit global milestones along the way, year after year and decade after decade. That includes, by 2030, contributing to cutting global production and consumption of all fossil fuels by at least 30%, and making good on commitments made at COP28 on ending deforestation, doubling energy efficiency, and tripling renewables. Every country must deliver and play their rightful part. And that means that G20 leaders working in solidarity to accelerate a just global energy transition aligned with the 1.5-degree limit, they must assume their responsibilities. We need cooperation, not finger-pointing. It means that the G20 aligning their national climate action plans, their energy strategies, and their plans for fossil fuel production and consumption within a 1.5-degree future. And it means the G20 pledging to reallocate subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables, storage and grid modernization, and support for vulnerable communities. It means the G7 and other OECD countries committing to end coal by 2030 and to create fossil fuel-free power systems and reduce oil and gas supply and demand by 60% by 2035. It means all countries ending new coal projects now, particularly in Asia, home to 95% of planned new coal power capacity. And it means non-OECD countries creating climate action plans to put them on a path to ending coal power by 2040. And it means developing countries creating national climate action plans that double as investment plans, spurring sustainable development, and meeting soaring energy demand with renewables. The United Nations is mobilizing our entire system to help developing countries to achieve these through our Climate Promise initiative. Every city, region, industry, financial institution, and company must also be part of the solution. They must present robust transition plans by COP30 next year in Brazil at the latest. Plans aligned with 1.5 degrees and the recommendations of the UN high-level expert group on net zero. Plans that cover emissions across the entire value chain, that include interim targets and transparent verification processes, and that steer clear of the dubious carbon offsets that erode public trust while doing little or nothing to help the climate. We can't fool nature. False solutions will backfire. We need high-integrity carbon markets that are credible and with rules consistent with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And I also encourage scientists and engineers to focus urgently on carbon dioxide removal and storage, to deal safely and sustainably with final emissions from the heavy industries hardest to clean. And I urge governments to support them. But let me be clear, these technologies are not a silver bullet. They cannot be a substitute for drastic emission cuts or an excuse to delay fossil fuel phase-out. But we need to act on every front. Dear friends, the second area for action is ramping up protection from the climate chaos of today and tomorrow. It is a disgrace that the most vulnerable are being left stranded, struggling desperately to deal with a climate crisis they did nothing to create. We cannot accept a future where the rich are protected in air-conditioned bubbles, while the rest of humanity is lashed by lethal weather in unlivable lands. We must safeguard people and economies. Every person on Earth must be protected by an early warning system by 2027. And I urge all partners to boost support for the United Nations Early Warnings for All Action Plan. In April, the G7 launched the Adaptation Accelerator Hub. By COP29, this initiative must be translated into concrete action to support developing countries in creating adaptation investment plans and putting them into practice. And I urge all countries to set up their adaptation and investment needs clearly in their new national climate plans. But change on the ground depends on money on the table. For every dollar needed to adapt to extreme weather, only about 5 cents is available. At the first step, all developed countries must honor their commitment to double adaptation finance to at least $40 billion a year by 2025. And they must set out a clear plan to close the adaptation finance gap by COP29 in November. But we also need more fundamental reform. And that leads me on to my third point, finance. Dear friends, if money makes the world go round, today's unequal financial flows are sending us spinning towards disaster. The global financial system must be part of the climate solution. Eye-watering debt repayments are drying up funds for climate action. Extortion-level capital costs are putting renewables virtually out of reach for most developing and emerging economies. Astoundingly, and despite the renewables boom of recent years, clean energy investments in developing and emerging economies outside of China have been stuck at the same levels since 2015. Last year, just 15% of new clean energy investments went to emerging markets and developing economies outside China, countries representing nearly 2/3 of the world's population. And Africa was home to less than 1% of last year's renewables installations, despite its wealth of natural resources and vast renewables potential. The International Energy Agency reports that clean energy investments in developing and emerging economies beyond China need to reach up to $1.7 trillion a year by the early 2030s. In short, we need a massive expansion of affordable public and private finance to fuel ambitious new climate plans and deliver clean, affordable energy for all. The September Summit of the Future is an opportunity to push reform of the international financial architecture and action on debt. And I urge countries to take it. And I urge G7 and G20 summits to commit to using their influence within multilateral development banks to make them better, bigger and bolder, and able to leverage far more private finance at reasonable cost. Countries must make significant contributions to the new Loss and Damage Fund and ensure that it is open for business by COP29. And they must come together to secure a strong finance outcome from COP this year, one that builds trust and confidence, catalyzes the trillions needed, and generates momentum for reform of the international financial architecture. But none of these will be enough without new, innovative sources of funds. It's time to put an effective price on carbon and tax the windfall profits of fossil fuel companies. And by COP29, we need early movers to go from exploring to implementing solidarity levies on sections such as shipping, aviation and fossil fuel extraction to help fund climate action. This should be scalable, fair and easy to collect and administer. And none of this is charity. It is enlightened self-interest. Climate finance is not a favor. It's a fundamental element to a livable future for all. Dear friends, fourth and finally, we must directly confront those in the fossil fuel industry who have shown relentless zeal for obstructing progress over decades. Billions of dollars have been thrown at distorting the truth, deceiving the public, and sowing doubt. And I thank the academics and the activists, the journalists and the whistleblowers who have exposed those tactics, often at great personal and professional risk. And I call on leaders in the fossil fuel industry to understand that if you are not in the fast lane to clean energy transformation, you are driving your business into a dead end and taking us all with you. Last year, the oil and gas industry invested a measly 2.5% of its total capital spending on clean energy. Doubling down on fossil fuels in the 21st century is like doubling down on horseshoes and carriage wheels in the 19th. So, to fossil fuel executives, I say, your massive profits give you the chance to lead the energy transition. Don't miss it. And financial institutions are also critical because money talks. It must be a voice for change. And I urge financial institutions to stop bankrolling fossil fuel destruction and start investing in a global renewables revolution. To present public, credible and detailed plans to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy with clear targets for 2025 and 2030. And to disclose your climate risks, both physical and transitional, to your shareholders and regulators. Ultimately, such disclosure should be mandatory. Dear friends, many in the fossil fuel industry have shamelessly greenwashed even as they have sought to delay climate action with lobbying, legal threats and massive ad campaigns. And they have been aided and abetted by advertising and PR companies. Mad Men, remember the TV series, fueling the madness. I call on these companies to stop acting as enablers of planetary destruction. Stop taking on new fossil fuel clients from today and set out plans to drop your existing ones. Fossil fuels are not only poisoning our planet, they are toxic for your brand. Your sector is full of creative minds who are already mobilizing around this cause. They are gravitating towards companies that are fighting for our planet, not trashing it. And they also call on countries to act. Many governments restrict or prohibit advertising for products that harm human health, like tobacco. Some are now doing the same with fossil fuels. I urge every country to ban advertising from fossil fuel companies. And I urge news media and tech companies to stop taking fossil fuel advertising. We must all deal also with the demand side. All of us can make a difference by embracing clean technologies, facing down fossil fuels in our own lives, and using our power as citizens to push for systemic change. In the fight for a livable future, people everywhere are far ahead of politicians. Make your voices heard and your choices count. Dear friends, we do have a choice, creating tipping points for climate progress or careening to tipping points for climate disaster. No country can solve the climate crisis in isolation. This is an all-in moment. And the United Nations is all in, working to build trust, to find solutions, and to inspire the cooperation our world so desperately needs. And to young people, to civil society, to cities, regions, businesses, and others who have been leading the charge towards a safer, cleaner world, I say thank you. You are on the right side of history. You speak for the majority. Keep it up. Don't lose courage. Don't lose hope. If we the peoples it is we the peoples versus the polluters and the profiteers. Together we can win. But it's time for leaders to decide whose side they are on. Tomorrow it will be too late. Now is the time to mobilize. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to deliver. This is our moment of truth, and I thank you.
Secretary General, I'm so glad the applause has stopped so that we can have a conversation. I was a little worried it would take the rest of the hour. It is so good to see you. You have made more than 100 speeches and addresses about climate action. You have sat down and done more than 50 interviews with the media or press briefings about climate action, plus all of the social media posts and videos. What distinguishes the address that you just delivered from all of the others?
I think that what distinguishes this address is the recognition that we are really in a moment of truth. And now there is no time to lose. As I was speaking, 3 reports were published today. One of the reports gives a clear indication that we will very likely have overshooting in relation to the 1.5 degrees in the years ahead. It's not a tragedy, because the 1.5 degrees is seen as an objective, as a long-term objective, and is a limit that we need to respect until the end of the century. But this is a very, very strong alert. It's the first time that is said by a scientific institution that the risk of overshooting is now very high in the next few years. And we need to act fast to make sure that if there is an overshooting, we recover quickly. Second, a clear indication that we had the last 12 months, months after months, the hottest months in history, which shows that we are really coming to the moment of truth. And finally, the indication by scientists that we are very close to some tipping points. I mentioned 5 of the tipping points we are getting very close to. The risk of it can last for a long period, and if we act even if there is an irreversible tipping point, if we act effectively, we can prolong it for more than 1,000 years. But there is a risk of reaching a tipping point in relation to the melting of Greenland, of West Antarctica, in relation to the coral reefs in the large part of the earth or of the oceans, a serious risk in relation to permafrost and to what we are already witnessing in namely the Arctic areas, and a huge risk about the Labrador currents. And we all know the impact that it would have in relation to the weather in Europe. So we are getting very close to these tipping points, which means very close to a moment in which there will be an acceleration much faster than everything we have witnessed until now, because there is an effect in which those tipping points have that power of acceleration. And so this is a moment in which it's with the COP coming, and then the COP in Brazil in the next year, with key decisions to be made, and with countries now preparing the so-called national determined contributions, this is the moment in which the key decisions must be made. And that is what makes different the intervention I made today. We have no more time to lose.
You are very direct about your feelings about the fossil fuel industry. You call them the godfathers of climate chaos. Your potent call to action regarding the fossil fuel industry is sponsorship. Ads, do not pay for them if they come from the fossil fuel industry. Why are you calling for that very direct action now?
Because I think the fossil fuel industry has an historic opportunity. They are having record profits, and they can lead the renewables transition. They can be the massive investors in the new forms of energy. And if they are the massive investors in the new forms of energy, they will keep the leadership in energy that they have today. If they double down on what they do today, and I've just said that only 2.5% of their investment goes to renewables, sooner or later, that is inevitable, their business model will be outdated. So I think this is also an opportunity for the fossil fuel industry to understand that they must take the huge resources that they manage, they take them to make them the leaders of the renewables transition, guaranteeing that they will go on in the decades to come to be leaders in the global energy sectors in the world.
Secretary General, there is this conflict of interest between making money for the fossil fuel industry and being good stewards of the planet Earth. How much empathy do you have for nations and communities who are driven by the money they make from the fossil fuel industry? Their economies rely on fossil fuels.
If you notice what I said that we need a transition, but we need a just transition. And obviously, we cannot treat everybody in the same way. It is clear that for some, namely developing countries that rely a lot in the fossil fuel industry, we need to have very important programs of support in order to help them do their own transition. But that is a responsibility that developed countries have in order to make sure that transition is just. And it's not only a question of countries, it's a question of people that work in the sector. There will be, whenever there is a technological revolution, and we are witnessing that technological revolution in energy as in artificial intelligence. Whenever there is a technological revolution in the world, in the times that follow, we have a massive acceleration of economic growth and economic development. But there is people that lags behind, because that revolution does not treat equally everybody. So we need at the same time to accelerate that transition that is essential, but at the same time to establish the programs, social programs of different nature, regional programs and programs of support to the countries impacted in order to be able for them to adapt to the new situation and not to be lagging behind in a very dramatic situation.
I am going to share this conversation with you, with many of the people around the world who wanted to ask you questions as well. One from Instagram. Developed nations investing in green technology, what should they be doing to help the developing nations who are, many of them, suffering or seeing the cause of climate change greater than in the developed nations? How can that technology help those two different areas?
I think it is absolutely essential to have a huge acceleration on support to adaptation. And support to adaptation, especially in developing countries that are dramatically impacted. I mean, we have in this table, in this audience, the ambassador of Pakistan. I was there and I've seen the floods. I know the dramatic impact that that represents. I was in Nepal and I see how the glaciers are melting at record speed, devastating communities in a tragic way. So it is clear that we need a massive investment in adaptation. It is clear that adaptation finance must grow in a very meaningful way, and multilateral development banks need to put a much larger share of their capacity on that. But it is true that the problem is not only money. It's a problem of organization, it's a problem of technology. So it is essential that countries that have problems with the impacts of climate change develop their own plans, but it is essential that developed countries provide them with the technologies that are necessary for the best use of those investments to protect their populations and their economies.
Eloise Ferreira wanted to ask you this question, and it was really thinking about Hurricane Otis in Acapulco in Mexico, major hurricane damage. What would you advise for governments and areas, regions that are on the coast about how to be ready for perhaps a very devastating hurricane season that's coming up? What is the preparedness they should be doing now beyond early warning?
Well, there are a number of investments that can be done to minimize the impact of such impacts, of such hurricanes. I've recently visited some islands in the Caribbean where they have had different works of protection of the coast. I've seen also in the Caribbean different examples of investing in the housing sector to guarantee that the houses and the warehouses and the other installations are better prepared to resist the hurricane. And I've seen places where constructions that are not adequate are destroyed and constructions that are adequate can resist. So there are lots of things that can be done in preparation to minimize the impact of these hurricanes. But our obligation as an international community is to do everything that is needed to stop this growth of emissions, to reduce drastically emissions, and to make sure that we do not go on in this acceleration in which year after year we have hurricanes that are more frequent, more devastating, and with more terrible consequences for the populations that are impacted.
This, Secretary General, was a very popular question, came from many different platforms, but I'm going to use Alexandra's words from Portugal. How can we do more to engage in climate action as individuals, and then how can NGOs be part of a climate action alliance?
Well, first of all, individuals have the right to vote. It's good to exercise the right to vote in line to objectives of climate action. Individuals can organize themselves in different ways and can use social media platforms in a very effective way. We have seen how sometimes one individual can have a global impact just with a smart use of social media platforms. And then they can come together and build a strong civil society with the non-governmental organizations that are in the front line, that are already today in the front line in different aspects, supporting communities, namely in adaptation, but also raising their voices and being strong lobbyists in favor of climate action and in favor of all the reforms that are necessary in order to make sure that we stop this running into hell in which we are at the present time.
I know you've met many young climate activists and many young people who are really passionate about making sure that 1.5, we stay below 1.5. How do you balance your message between scaring us, like this has to happen now, there's an urgency, and then understanding that there are many people who have climate anxiety? So for instance, with your special address, was it 50% fear, 50% inspiration?
No, let's be clear. We are in trouble, but we have the solution to solve the problem. And I mean, the technological evolution is absolutely amazing. If you see what's happening in renewables and the reduction of the cost of renewables is absolutely amazing. I mean, artificial intelligence can become an extremely important instrument in relation to increasing our potential to fight climate change. We see how efficiency can be gained in different productive sectors, reducing emissions. I mean, we see news about what is being prepared in the maritime sector or in aviation. I mean, there is movement, there is will and capacity by many. What is lacking is essential political will and the capacity to face vested interests and not to abide by their pressure.
So, Secretary General, if I may say this, you are a very tough taskmaster, because usually in an address there might be one call to action, one ask. You lined up 33. It's a lot.
It's a transformation of society, and it's a transformation of policy, and it is a real redesign of the priorities that we see in today's world. Unfortunately, climate change has been victim of a diversion of attention of public opinions, of governments and of media because of the horrible conflicts we are witnessing. And we cannot let those horrible conflicts that need to be solved, we cannot let them distract us from what is the existential threat of our times for humankind, and that is climate change. And so, with all the problems we face, with all the difficulties we have, with all the conflicts, the divisions, the geopolitical problem, with all that, we need to say clearly, the existential problem of our times is climate change. And climate change must be, independently of everything else, a first priority we cannot put aside.
If we were going to give everybody who's watching this address, whenever they're watching it, an assignment that is manageable, would you say go off and do all 33? Or would you say go and do 5, go and do 1? What do we leave our audience with?
I didn't understand your question. Can you?
Your 33 calls to action.
Yes.
Shall we start with 1 or 5? How do we do that? What is manageable?
Everything is manageable. It's strictly a matter of political will. Everything is manageable. If you see any development plan of any country, there are hundreds of measures. If you see our proposals for the Summit of the Future, there are lots of different measures that the member states are now discussing based on the work of co-facilitators that are representatives of member states that are preparing the documents for the Summit of the Future. There is an enormous amount of proposals. I mean, there is an element of complexity in today's world. Everything is interlinked. There is not a easy solution. We must act in all fronts because all fronts are interlinked. And we need to understand the complexity of our time, and we need to have answers that are not simplistic, that are complex, but at the same time with the clear orientation and the clear guiding principle that that one is one and unified.
Secretary General Antonio Guterres, thank you for sharing your special address on climate action with us today. We appreciate you and your time, and thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.